Welcome back, warriors, where war never ends and sanity never lasts. Don't forget to hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and brace yourselves, because from here on out there is only war. Let's go. I have, shall we say, given this gentleman his fair treatment over the course of this channel, and by fair treatment I mean that I've used him to call the Emperor a schmuck time and time again. But I realize I've never really gone into him as a character or anything like that. I've spoken about how he's a better god than Biggie in all sorts of different ways, but never more than that. So today we're going to be rectifying this massive issue. Sit down by the campfire and make yourself a nice cup of hot chocolate, and let me tell you a tale. Actually, screw that. This guy's a barbarian god king. Grab yourself the finest flag and a veil you have to hand, and get ready to listen to the story of Sigmar on Barogan, or Sigmar Heldenhammer, or simply just Sigmar. A man turned god, turned even bigger god. This man has seen and done it all. Yeah, this whole video was just an excuse to use another clip of Karl Franz. What about it? Something important to mention first, however. While Sigmar has magic flowing through his veins that make him immune to corruption. Your computer. Alright, now we talk about Sigmar. Sigmar was once a man born to the Unbroken Tribe, one of the many different groups of humans in the lands that would become the Empire of Man. They weren't yet unified, though with this man's birth that would come soon enough. He was born to the chieftain of the tribe and was technically royalty, though given that these were pre-imperial times, that's only saying so much. He gets the finest bear skin that he has to kill himself anyways. He's not living in the lap of luxury. The twin-tailed comet sword far overhead signified the birth of a legendary hero. He was born in less than ideal conditions. By that I mean his mother died mid-birth because an orc decided to take a chopper to her vital organs. She died of blood loss, but Sigmar's father and his bodyguard managed to reach her before the orcs could cut short all of Warhammer. This wasn't even like a Zench orchestrated plot or something. This just happened. I'd say poor Sigmar, but his mom wasn't exactly having the time of her now ended life. Now was she? After this, he lived the typical life of your young barbarian war chief prince. Whatever. He underwent what was called Dooming Day, a coming-of-age ritual where he gets locked in a tomb of his ancestors and sees if they have anything good to tell him. Not having too much to tell him, Sigmar climbed out of the cave and saw that, as it turns out, his father ruled over a little more than a bunch of scared hamlets, and Sigmar was not happy about this. It was time to change things. First, Sigmar grabs from his friends, who together apparently made a pretty balanced DD group, and went to kill a big boar that had gotten quite the reputation for killing people that tried to do this. When they got there, his friends all booked it, and Sigmar tamed it by yanking a spear out of its back before going a separate way. This might not sound too important, but consider this. It sets a precedent. Sigmar can smash things flat with no problem if he needs to, but the man is more than just a roid-raging barbarian. He can think, he can make diplomacy. Keep that in mind for later. As for some actual fun stuff though, when he turned 15, he saved the life of the High King of the Dwarfs. Some orcs had been raiding on Brogon lands, and Sigmar actually shares something in common with Commander Farsight. At least in fantasy. Any amount of orcs alive more than 0 is far too many orcs. But these orcs held something special. Kurdan Ironbeard, the High King of the Dwarves at the time, and possessor of one of these single dwarfiest names to ever exist. Kurgan saw Sigmar giving the Black Orc war boss the business, and though its armor was too thick for Sigmar's bronze sword to pierce it, he was still impressed that this mere human was going to town on such a beast. So he broke free of his bonds, because dwarfs are all compact little brick houses, fought his way to the war boss's tent, and grabbed a special little present for Sigmar. Gal Maraz, apparently, swearing the entire time, because dwarfs are known for many things, but elegance isn't one of them. Kurgan tossed the hammer to Sigmar, and Sigmar put Skull Splitter to good use and split that damn orc skull. Or shattered, really, but that's technically still splitting. Shattering is just splitting into a lot of pieces. Sigmar is apparently a polite lad, so he tried to give the hammer back, but in a first that would cement the two races as friends for all time, Kurgan Ironbeard gifted the hammer to Sigmar. The weapon was highly magical and ancient, even to the dwarfs, and it's believed that it has a mind of its own and chooses its wielder. It's as if the weapon was always Sigmar's and was just waiting for him to come claim it. God, that's cool, isn't it? Also, in case you forgot, he's 15. You know, I don't want to speak for anyone, but I'm assuming none of us were murdering Black Orc war bosses at 15. Anyways, he went on to murder more, or except for that one of his friends died, which is pretty sad. But Sigmar otherwise did pretty well for his first time commanding a truly massive army. He wiped out the orc forces handily and returned to what would become outdoor fanglory. His friend's twin brother was pretty unhappy with Sigmar for, in his mind, leading his mother to his death. But surely that wouldn't come back to bite him. Surely not. Meanwhile, the alliance with the dwarfs was giving Sigmar's forces access to such things as iron. Before that, they were barely in the Bronze Age. So this is actually something huge. Especially since the Chaos Gods finally woke up to the hell this dude was going to be causing them for the next 2,500 years. They sent that armada of Norsey to kill him stone dead. His father went to face them and killed the cast lord leading the invasion at the cost of his own life. Sigmar, for his part, didn't know any of this yet. He did, however, know about his dead friend's brother assaulting him, murdering his sister and Sigmar's own lover, and tossing Sigmar into a river as the Chaos Gods empowered him with demonhood. Oh look, that thing came back to bite. Who would have guessed that's also Azazel's backstory? So if you're wondering where that weird-looking dude from Total Warhammer came from, now you know. All of Sigmar's wins, by the way, seem to be balanced off with the fattest of losses, having been thrown into a river by ESL. Sigmar woke up in a grey-scaled land where there were shadow monsters everywhere. It was barren and boring looking, and his dad was there, giving him a bear hug and helping him kill shadow demons. Turns out Sigmar was on death's doorstep and took a vacation to Mor's garden, the god of the dead. He and his father fought alongside a whole bunch of unbroken warrior ghosts against the shadow demons and the ghost of the warlord his dad killed, before his father gave him a fancy amulet and finally passed on to the afterlife. Rather miffed at the loss of his father, even though he got to speak to him one last time, Setinar was now in control of the Unbroken tribe and slaughtered the Norse tribes nearly to the last. The survivors fled to the coast of Norska from Norland and became the Norskins, whose descendants would forever plague the Empire with constant raids and sacking Nordland every 3 turns in Total Warhammer. With outside threats dealt with for the time being, Sigmar went about his initial dream of uniting the tribes of man into one proud nation. While there are various tales of valor he embarked upon, here is one I'd like to focus on in particular. The subjugation of the Tittigens, those who become Midden-lenders of the province of Midden High. Their King Arthur decided he was going to turtle on the Faustlag, the most impenetrable fortress atop Middenheim. Sigmar gave him a day before he climbed up there himself, and demanded he account for his actions, as well as submit before challenging him to one-on-one combat near the Flame of Ulrich, the chief gods of the lands. Archer couldn't exactly back down from honorable combat, right next to the holiest altar of a war god, and so the duel began. Sigmar was pushed back into the Flame of Ulrich, but unlike Malekith, Ulrich was actually quite fond of this lad. So with the power of the god of winter and wolves coursing through his veins, Arthur was Gal Maraz, and the Tottigens now a part of Sigmar's growing realm. The rest of the Empire was united in relatively short order, and then, because reality realized Sigmar had a moment to breathe, the tide of greenskins, larger than any other, were making their way towards the Dwarven Empire. In issue for several reasons. 1, because the 2 nations weaken, bury now friend. And 2, because after you get through the dwarves, you get to the Empire. Sigmar killed 1 army of them, then Kurgan showed up and said, "Hey chief, that was the warm-up." So in preparation for round 2, Seymour convinced a whole bunch of people to rally behind him, while the dwarves held the bulk of the greenskins at bay. Only 2 tribes refused his call, the Utones, who were the ancestors, Marienburg. So of course they didn't give a about the rest of the Empire, and the Bertoni stupid, smug, arrogant, dumb pricks ever since the dawn of time. And then, year -1, Imperial calendar. No more distracting the orcs, for the rest the dwarves had to withdraw to their holds. Now a united army of man and dwarf named Sigmar's Hammer stood at the Blackfire Pass to hold back the orcs, with the knowledge that if they fail, both races would become little more than fertilizer wherever their corpses wind up. The battle is not a complete shutout, but it was beyond legendary. Wave after wave of orcs descended upon the army, and wave after wave was repulsed at great cost. After being knocked down by trolls, Sigmar's life was saved by the king of another tribe named Marbod, who sacrificed himself to bring our hero his weapon. With this, Sigmar was done being a king and ready to start being Doomguy. So he took the elven sword his friend tossed him in one hand, Gal Maraz in another, and just started ending greenskins. 1 would come to him, 1 would die. 10 would come to him, 10 would be sent to Gork and Mark. Personally, it's unknown if this was an attempt to rally his forces with sheer insanity, or if Sigmar really had just gone off the deep end and started murdering everything in front of him. I like to think it's the latter. At last he had cut his way through enough of the army that the orc in charge decided enough was enough, and flew down atop a wyvern to put an end to this upstart get. And then the orc and wyvern died brutally, and lest, however, the effort was finally too much for Sigmar, who collapsed to the ground, exhausted, unable to defend himself. The remaining orcs attempted to put an end to this madman when his army burst into action and threw themselves into the orc horde. Heaven, remember that as warriors they're actually supposed to fight and not just watch their general do all the work. The greenskins were routed as man and dwarf put them to the sword. With this and one last little ceremony by the Pope of Ulrich, just to make sure he was super extra for real worthy, Sigmar was crowned the emperor of the lands now known as the Empire of Man. One last tribe was brought to heel with diplomacy. Proto-Marienburg was invaded and conquered, and Sagumar's 50 years of rule began, and it was good. Sigmar even found a cool crown of sorcery, which most certainly did not tempt him with promises of power if he would just surrender his free will. Then the Norse tribe came back and killed another one of Sigmar's friends. By God, having any kind of personal relationship with this man is at that sentence. Sigmar responded with a small little bit of genocide, just a tad, against a group of traitor strikesmen, until one of his childhood friends, who somehow made it to adulthood, calmed him down. Sigmar wept the most manly of tears over what he had done, and ceased his actions. Then this scenario repeated itself another time, until Sigmar finally realized that the goddamn crown he picked up was screwing with his brain, and turning him into a real, as well as rather gaunt and skeletal. I wonder who could be causing that to happen. The remaining Norskin siege Bittenheim, the friend who talked Sigmar down from the ledge the first time, was killed because, of course, he was, and the Dorskins were driven back once more. 4. Sigmar decided he was sick of waiting for them to come to him, and went to them instead, and many Norse villages were destroyed. See, I might feel bad for them if they didn't worship the Chaos Gods. It's kind of hard to pity someone who worships the pantheon of Satans. So Sigmar went full Conan the Barbarian again for a bit. He once again stopped short of killing everyone though, which this time I won't even pretend to hold any pretenses about what happens. It leads to more chaos problems down the line. But first, which you've all been waiting for. Nagash wants his damn crown back, and boy, did he put up one hell of a fight to get it across the entirety of the empire. Undead roses won and assaulted the lands of the living. Not intending to conquer, but rather keep the empire divided. As undead attacked each of the regions, Nagash himself made for Reichdorf. That's Altdorf, by the way. I know I mentioned Altdorf earlier, but it wasn't called in that yet. I'm gonna keep calling it Altdorf though. Wearing Nagash's crown, the two rode out to battle. Sigmar rallied the city as the living and undead clashed in a battle rivaled only by Blackfire Pass. Though wearing the crown gave Sigmar some resistance to Nagash's magic, and Nagash, and was still wearing our hero, town brought low by his magic. It was only the arrival of reinforcements that distracted Nagash long enough for Sigmar to break free of his control. In the desert, moved, Sigmar threw off Nagash's crown and taunted him, telling him to take his stupid headgear if he was brave enough. Nagash, greedy dickbag that he is, tried to pick it up and just completely ignored Sigmar for a moment. And then Sigmar did what he did best and beat the out of Nagash with Gal Maraz, ending him once and for about 20 minutes. Can't really kill this guy. And then it was time for one last, final challenge to Sigmar's reign. One young man had escaped Sigmar's attack on the Norskins, a man named Murkar. If you've ever looked at icons items on either tabletop or in Total Warhammer, you might know who this guy is, but if you don't, Murkar was the first ever chosen of Chaos, with the combined might of the Chaos Gods and their followers behind his cause. Much information on the specifics of this war have been lost to time, but it's safe to say that it absolutely sucked. As the followers of the Four marched further and further into the Empire, demons began manifesting on the material plane and fighting alongside the Norskins. At the climax of the war, Sigmar and Murkar fought for 24 hours straight before Sigmar finally defeated the first ever chosen. Murkar came closer to ending his life than any other, even Nagash. But even he couldn't stand up to Sigmar's power. And then finally at last the challenges to Sigmar's reign had come to an end. 50 years had passed since the crowning of Sigmar as the Emperor of the Empire of Man, and at last the land knew peace. 80 years old by this time, Sigmar stood up from his throne, placed his crown down, and just left. There was no grand announcement, no passing on of the sword. He went for one last walk through Altdorf, taking in the sights of a spurging realm as it grew in this time of prosperity. He took some of his retinue and passed through Telheim, staying there for a night, admiring how it was not just his city prospering, but all, and dismissed the remainder of his followers. He kept walking towards the World Edge Mountains and looked back upon his realm one last time. He saw growing cities and roads snaking through the forest as civilization grew far beyond what it was when he was a child. He turned around, never to look back, and walked through Blackfire Pass one final time before Disa appearing. He also butchered a Lord of Change of the past, who presumably thought of that an army by his side could take Sigmar. He just locked it up right in Gal Maraz for years. That was the end of it. 100 years after his disappearance, the dwarfs gave the Empire a replica of Gal Maraz, though secretly they assumed that the humans would come to call this weapon the real ones instead of the dwarfs. Humans all have short-term memory loss. They were spot on with that, by the way. While in at least one of the books, Sigmar did indeed have a child whose descendants may very well be running around the Empire today, according to the official story known to the Empire at large. Sigmar left nowhere. He claimed that the entirety of mankind was to be his heir to the throne, and so the kings of the various tribes, and now made up of the Empire, made a decision. They would elect one amongst their own number to become the new emperor, and thus were the elected counts born. I am holding myself back from making the obvious, not even a joke reference. I want you all to know that, of course, as you can guess, Sigmar is not done yet. Over the following decades, rumors of Sigmar either appearing to help in times of crisis, or him washing over his land from beyond the realms of men, grew in number. It came to a head when one nutjob named Johann Hellstrom preached word of a vision he had, where Ulrich had gifted Sigmar with divinity, and the new religion spread like wildfire. While the established Krifonas, LTS within the Empire were less than pleased with this, the population loved it. More importantly, because Hellstrom preached that the law is set down by Sigmar, were divine, that meant they had the divine right to rule. So between the favor of both the common man and the nobility, the cult of Sigmar came into being 23 years after his disappearance, in 73 IC. Indeed, through the Empire's faith and their departed leader, even the replica Gal Maraz began to gain powers it couldn't have had through the work of the dwarfs alone. Also, maybe it's just me out team, but this whole thing sounds vaguely like the Protestant Revolution. Only with more cool hammer gods and less arguing if you can buy your way into heaven or not. As it turns out though, Johann was right. Sigmar had indeed descended to godhood, which means he traded out being emperor for an even bigger workload. having to hold back the forces of darkness 24/7 now, which is what he was doing before, but now he doesn't get to sleep. Even worse for Sigmar, he had really pissed off the dark gods over the course of his life, and now that he's a god, they were even less happy. So Tzeentch, in a rare showing of actually doing something important in fantasy, trapped Sigmar in the magical vortex at Ultron, on the one hand. This meant Sigmar could do little as a god except empower those who fought in his name, and the occasional miracle. Not much chancing at his hands dirty anymore. On the other hand, imagine trapping Goku or Vegeta in the hyperbolic time chamber. They would have nothing to do except train, and train some more. Sure, while they're in there, they're not going to be a threat. But if they ever get out, you've just given your biggest enemies one hell of a power boost. And that's more or less what happened. Sigmar became bound to the magical wind of heaven. And now we get to the end times when Teclis tried to bind the winds of magic to various elves. Tyrion, Marathi, and Sinesh herself screwed the ritual up royally. Pretty much nothing went according to plan, and most of the winds just went to whoever might fit the most on the planet. Except for one of them. Heaven, because, as I said, it already found the person who fitted the most. And it was trapped inside the vortex for, 2,000 years or so, just basking in magical energy, growing stronger and stronger. So the vortex trapping him undone, Sigmar threw himself across the world, jumped in the body of Karl Franz, and went to work. Well, no, I'm still bitter about how they handled Karl Franz's death. To give Sigmar some credit, it shows that he hasn't let his time as a god make him soft. Immediately, Altorf was purged of the Nurgo chaos, corruption infesting it, and he took to the field in Franz's body. When he was reunited with Gal Maraz, the real one this time, Sigmar had reached the peak of his power. Alas, Warhammer Fantasy's perceived unprofitability had sealed its fate, and in Middenheim Sigmar wrestled with the Archon over Gal Maraz as the world ended around them. He won the battle for his hammer, but lost the war for the planet. So he sat on the core of the world, plummeting through nothingness, and then he was found by Jakoshin, who I like to call Puff the Magic Dragon, because I couldn't think of a better joke. He brought Sigmar to the realm of Azir in the forming mortal realms at large, and once more did Sigmar go to work. He began protecting and guiding the re-emerging races of man, elephant, dwarf, and freeing any gods he managed to find. Nagash was first, and though Sigmar didn't really like Nagash at these early stages, he needed someone he knew was strong enough to help him out. Together they fought beings that would supposedly give even the Chaos Gods pause for thought. He slowly came across the rest of what would become his pantheon, sometimes freeing them from a bit of a goof like Grimnir and Grogni, or sometimes just fighting them out and about, like the elf heroes turned gods. Together they formed the pantheon of the mortal realms, and it was good for an indeterminate amount of time, and then it started breaking apart, because we still need a war game. Chaos started showing up, the various gods started leaving, and eventually it came to a head at the Battle of the Burning Skies. Nagash was the last one to leave aside, but did it in a way that basically kicked Sigmar and his army in the balls on the way out. So, Sigmar chased him back to Shish. Remember, there was an apocalyptic battle going on, and he ran back to find out things weren't going too hot. He tried to end things between him and Ericon with a single throw of his hammer, and then Arche unshattered into little pieces. Not in a good way though, because it was an illusion, and the hammer went straight into the realm of chaos. So, with chaos beating down reality once again, Sigmar took his ball and went home. He locked off his realm of Azir for a couple hundred years, and went to work on something to fix things. Hundreds of years later, Sigmar threw open the doors of Azir and sent forth his legions, who shall know no fear, the Stormcast Eternals, the Sigmarines, finally rallied forth and took back the realms from Case, or, parts of some of the realms. But hey, it's progress. And either way, Sigmar now has his own Space Marines, ones that are infinitely more interesting than actual Space Marines. Since then, Sigmar's attention in the Age of Sigmar has been on fighting the good fight. He's been trying to figure out how to prevent Stormcast from becoming mindless automatons of his will after they die in refreshing of times, with pretty lackluster results. I gotta be honest, he's learned how to delegate people to problems, rather than always resorting to showing up and beating people to death himself. So he's getting pretty good at the whole being a god thing. Marethia sent it to godhood, and he started preparing to fight her and the Daughters of Cain on top of everyone else. And overall, his position in the Age of Sigmar can be summed up as getting ready to fight everyone at once. He's had limited success, but time will tell if the Stormcast can regain some momentum from when they first appeared, or if they'll keep getting their kicked in. Also, in regards to Marathi, he sent the Celestine Prime to deal with her, instead of doing it himself, with the insinuation that she was still beneath his time and direct attention, which is just great. My thirst for dark elf mommy milkers doesn't mean that Marathi deserves anything but the worst in life. He wants more than anything to fight chaos directly alongside his forces, but knows that his responsibilities as a god come first. He also wishes to ascend into the winds of magic themselves, but only after the war against chaos is won. Even as a Binainu now, he always wants to move on to bigger and better things. Kinda uplifting, in a way. Even as a Baal, Sigmar knows there's always room to grow. As for his divinity, Sigmar is the god of the Empire as well as those who would stand against the forces of Case, orcs, and the undead, preaching martial bravery, without being a complete about it. His priests go into battle, decked in the heaviest plate mailed to hand. They're also bald, The Doors, rather than supporting his divinity, believe worship of Sigmar as Moroccan to venerating one's ancestors, but they support the practice nonetheless. For this reason, elves are iffy about him being a god, though at least by the time of modern Warhammer fantasy and the end times in particular, more and more were coming around to the fact that Sigmar probably stopped being a mere mortal some time ago. In Age of Sigmar he still got largely the same portfolio, though other races are more willing to call him a god, and he's willing to work with those he would have crushed without a second thought back in fantasy. This isn't to say he's gone soft. He's more than willing to put down the undead at a moment's notice. It's just that the gods he has to work with have grown beyond just being gods of his realm, whereas once his fellow gods would have been Auric, Mor, and Tau themselves, just different gods of the Empire. Sigmar now counts Nagash, Grogni, and the Elven gods as compatriots, sometimes even Gorka Morka. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but I like to imagine Sigmar learned over his thousands of years that there was more outside of the Empire than just the dwarfs worth allying with. And, I've gotten so used to putting in a do or don't for characters at the end of these that I kind of don't know how to end this one. Can't really place Sigmar on the tabletop because he just kind of wins, I guess. To wrap it off, I'll just say that, same as a god and one of the premier special figures in Warhammer fantasy, and naturally Age of Sigmar, in stark contrast to the Emperor, we not only get to see him in books as a character with former interactions with others, but he's also, well, a character, at least with the latest things about him. The Emperor feels like someone tried to personify the phrase, God works in mysterious ways, in the most annoying way possible, whereas Sigmar has always been an actual character with flaws and motivations beyond save humanity. He's a hard-headed who thinks with hammer first, but learns from his mistakes and recognizes when he does something wrong, be it morally or just in the sense of up. And that's it. You survived yet another video of mine. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to drop a like, subscribe, and leave a comment to let me know what you think, or just rant about some filthy Xenos. That works too. Thank you, of course, to my wonderful channel members. You are the Empire to my Sigmar. I may have created this abomination of a channel, but you all keep it going. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become I'm a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. Did you know that? Wait, hang on, I swear I'm not going to make a Rule 34 joke this time. This is an actual observation. Sigmar is basically Charlemagne. If the Empire being the Holy Roman Empire wasn't obvious enough, Sigmar is a Germanic warlord who united the region into one power. It's just that, unlike Charlemagne, Sigmar's Rome actually held together, and unlike the Holy Roman Empire and the Empire of Men actually mattered, its name also isn't a lie. It's an empire of men, compared to the not terribly holy, not at all Roman, not really an empire. I mean, I guess Sigmar's empire wasn't terribly imperialistic a lot at the time, and was more concerned with staying alive in the face of everything on the planet trying to kill it. But hey, 2 out of 3 is better than 0 to 3.